The slap from Rebecca didn't just knock my glasses off my face. It shattered every illusion I had about our family. The sting spread across my cheek like wildfire, but the burning in my heart hurt worse. I stood there, my vision blurred without my glasses, watching the shape of my daughter-in-law transform from family into stranger in an instant. "You stay out of my business!" Rebecca hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You're nothing but a nosy old woman who can't accept that your son is gone." I bent down slowly, my knees protesting as I retrieved my glasses from the hardwood floor. One lens had cracked a jagged line running through the center. How fitting! Everything I thought I knew about Rebecca now had the same fractured quality. Just moments before, I'd found it by accident. A legal document tucked carelessly between insurance papers on her kitchen counter while I was helping organize her files. Petition for determination of incapacity, with my name listed as the subject. My own daughter-in-law was trying to declare me mentally incompetent. I stumbled back home in the fading evening light, the Georgia humidity wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The neighbors waved as I passed, but I barely noticed them. My mind was racing, wondering how long Rebecca had been planning this, wondering if my son would recognize the woman he married, if he could see her now. My little house at the end of Magnolia Street stood waiting, a modest 2-bedroom that had been home for 40 years. The porch light cast a warm glow, but it couldn't chase away the chill that had settled in my bones. Inside, I went straight to the mantel where Marcus smiled back at me from behind glass. My beautiful boy, 6'2" with his father's broad shoulders and my determined chin. The photo was from his engineering school graduation, his cap slightly askew, his grin wide with promise. "Your wife isn't who we thought she was," I whispered to his image. "I think I've been blind, son, but I see her now." I touched the tender spot on my cheek where Rebecca's hand had left its mark. At 65, my skin didn't bounce back like it used to. There would be a bruise tomorrow, physical evidence of the emotional wound beneath. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. My finger hovered over the decline button, but curiosity won out. "Martha!" Her voice sounded different now, hesitant, almost frightened. "I need to ask a favor." The nerve of this woman. After what just happened, she was calling for a favor. I remained silent, letting the tension build on the line. "I need someone to watch Kayla tonight. I've got the night shift at the hospital." My heart skipped a beat at the mention of my granddaughter. 5-year-old Kayla, with her bright eyes and infectious laugh. Marcus's daughter, my last connection to him. "You want me to watch her after what just happened?" I kept my voice steady, though anger and suspicion churned inside me. "Please, Martha." Something in her tone made me pause. A tremor that hadn't been there before. "It's important. I wouldn't ask if I had any other option." I should have said no. Every instinct warned me to keep my distance after discovering that document. But Kayla, my sweet granddaughter, she was innocent in all this. "What time will you bring her over? In 20 minutes. Rebecca answered quickly, relief evident in her voice. "Thank you, Martha." As I hung up, unease settled over me like an approaching storm. Rebecca never worked night shifts on Tuesdays. In the 3 years since Marcus's accident, she'd maintained a consistent schedule. Something about Kayla needing routine. What had changed? And why did her voice sound so strange? I moved through the house with purpose, preparing the small guest room where Kayla usually stayed. Fresh sheets with the butterfly pattern she loved. Mr. Snuggles, the worn teddy bear that had once belonged to Marcus, placed carefully on the pillow. A small lamp with a star-patterned shade that cast constellations across the ceiling. While I worked, my mind replayed the scene in Rebecca's kitchen over and over. The slap, the document, the hatred in her eyes. It didn't align with the woman who had married my son 7 years ago, a sweet nurse with a gentle touch and easy laugh. The woman Marcus had fallen so deeply in love with. When had she changed? After Marcus died in the construction site accident, or had she always been this person hidden behind a carefully constructed facade? The doorbell rang precisely 18 minutes later. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Rebecca stood on the porch, one hand clutching her purse in a white-knuckled grip, the other holding Kayla's small hand. My granddaughter looked up at me with those big brown eyes, Marcus's eyes, but something was different tonight. The usual sparkle was dimmed, replaced by something that looked unsettlingly like fear. "Thanks for doing this," Rebecca said, not quite meeting my gaze. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the interior of my home as if searching for something. She wore her hospital scrubs, but her hair was pulled back too severely, not the casual ponytail she typically wore for shifts. "Kayla, baby, come give Grandma a hug," I said, crouching down despite my aching knees. Kayla stepped forward hesitantly. When she wrapped her thin arms around my neck, I felt her trembling. My alarm grew. "Everything okay, sweet pea?" I whispered into her ear. She didn't answer, just held on tighter. Rebecca shifted her weight from one foot to the other, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder toward the street. "I should go. I can't be late." "What time will you pick her up tomorrow?" I asked, standing with some effort, keeping one hand protectively on Kayla's shoulder. "After my shift ends. Around 10. Another nervous glance at the street. "Kayla, remember what we talked about. Okay, be good for Grandma." There was something loaded in that statement, something that made Kayla shrink against my side. Rebecca turned to leave, then paused. "Martha, about earlier. I'm sorry things got heated. We'll talk tomorrow, okay?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Before I could respond, she hurried down the porch steps and into her car, a new Lexus SUV that seemed excessive on a nurse's salary. I watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner, the sense of wrongness growing stronger with each passing moment. Kayla remained glued to my side, unusually quiet. Normally, she'd be chattering about school or her friends or asking to bake cookies. Tonight, she was a shadow of herself. "Come on in, baby. I made your favorite soup, chicken with stars, just how you like it." Inside, I set a bowl of soup in front of her at the kitchen table. Kayla stared at it but didn't pick up her spoon. Mr. Snuggles sat clutched in her lap, her small fingers working anxiously through his worn fur. "Not hungry, sweet pea?" She shook her head, eyes downcast. "You feeling sick?" I pressed my hand to her forehead. "No fever. I'm okay, Grandma." She whispered the first words she'd spoken since arriving. I sat beside her, pushing my own worry aside to focus on hers. "You know you can tell Grandma anything, right? Anything at all that's bothering you." Her lower lip trembled, but she pressed them together firmly, shaking her head again. I didn't push. Instead, I offered alternatives. "How about we skip dinner and have some ice cream instead? We can eat it while watching that princess movie you like." A tiny smile flickered across her face there and gone like summer lightning. "Can we?" "Special Grandma rules." I winked, my heart aching at how relieved she seemed at this small reprieve. We settled on the sofa with our bowls of ice cream, the animated movie playing, though neither of us seemed particularly interested. Kayla sat closer than usual, occasionally glancing at the windows as if worried someone might be watching. When she finally set her bowl aside, barely touched, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A purplish bruise circled her upper arm, just visible beneath the sleeve of her t-shirt. "Kayla, what happened to your arm, baby?" I kept my voice gentle, casual. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, panic flashing across her face. "Nothing. I fell at school." The lie was as obvious as the fear behind it. In my 35 years as an elementary school principal, I'd heard countless children attempt the same explanation for injuries that had nothing to do with falling. "Are you sure that's what happened?" I pressed carefully. "Yes." Her voice was barely audible. "I'm tired, Grandma. Can I go to bed now?" It wasn't even 8 o'clock. Kayla normally begged to stay up late at my house, knowing I was more lenient about bedtime than her mother. "Of course, sweet pea. Let's get you tucked in." As I helped her into her pajamas, I checked discreetly for other marks, relieved to find none. The single bruise troubled me deeply, but I knew better than to interrogate a frightened child. Tomorrow I'd approach the subject again when she'd had time to feel safe. I read her favorite story about the brave little bear who saved his forest friends from a storm. Usually she'd interrupt with questions or predictions about what would happen next. Tonight she listened in silence, clutching Mr. Snuggles to her chest like a shield. "Grandma loves you very much," I told her as I tucked the covers around her small body. "Nothing will ever change that. Nothing at all." her eyes so like Marcus's, filled with tears. "I know, Grandma." I kissed her forehead and turned on the star lamp, watching as the pinpricks of light danced across the ceiling. "Sweet dreams, my angel." I left her door ajar, the hallway light offering reassurance against the darkness. Instead of heading to my own bedroom, I settled in the living room with a cup of tea, my mind churning with questions. The document I'd found, Rebecca's strange behavior, Kayla's unusual quietness, and that troubling bruise. None of it made sense yet, all of it filled me with dread. I must have dozed off in my chair because I woke with a start to the sound of whimpering. The clock read 11:42 p.m. I hurried to Kayla's room, my heart pounding. She was thrashing in her sleep, small fists clutching the sheets, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma," she cried out, still caught in her nightmare, "I'm so scared, don't leave me." I sat on the edge of the bed, placing my hand gently on her shoulder. "Kayla, baby, wake up. Grandma's here." And her eyes flew open, wild with terror, until they focused on my face. Then she launched herself into my arms, sobbing against my chest. "It's okay, sweet pea. It was just a bad dream." I soothed, rocking her gently. "Grandma's right here. I'm not going anywhere. Promise." Her voice was muffled against my nightgown. "I promise. Nothing could keep me away from you." Eventually, her sobs subsided into hiccups and then into the deep, even breathing of sleep. But I continued holding her, my mind racing with new fears. What had frightened my granddaughter so deeply that it followed her into her dreams? And what did it have to do with Rebecca's strange behavior? Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I lay beside Kayla, listening to her breathe, watching the star patterns slowly fade as dawn crept through the window. By morning, I had made up my mind. I would get to the bottom of whatever was happening, no matter what it took. For Kayla, for Marcus, for the family that was slipping through my fingers. I made Kayla's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes, shaped like hearts, hoping to coax a smile from her solemn little face. She ate more than she had at dinner, which I considered progress. "Did you sleep okay after your bad dream?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational as I refilled her orange juice. She nodded, poking at a blueberry with her fork. "You know, when I was a little girl and had nightmares, my grandma told me that talking about bad dreams makes them less scary, takes away their power." Kayla looked up, considering this. "Does it work?" "It always did for me." I sat across from her, giving her my full attention. "Want to try?" She glanced nervously at the window, then back to me. "I don't think I'm supposed to." My heart rate picked up. "What do you mean, sweet pea?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Grandma Mom said I can't tell you what I saw at home." Eat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my face neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "You can tell me anything, Kayla. Anything at all. And it stays just between us if that's what you want." Her eyes darted to the window again, as if expecting Rebecca to appear suddenly. She clutched Mr. Snuggles tighter. "What did you see at home that you're not supposed to tell me about?" I prompted gently when she remained silent. Kayla's lower lip trembled. She leaned even closer, her voice so low I had to strain to hear it. "There's a little girl locked in our basement, Grandma. She won't stop crying. She says her hands hurt a lot." The world seemed to stop. The spoon I was holding clattered to the table, spattering drops of maple syrup across the white tablecloth. I stared at my granddaughter, searching her face for any sign that this was some kind of game or misunderstanding. All I saw was raw fear. "A little girl," I managed, my voice barely functioning. "In your basement." Kayla nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Mom gets really mad when she cries. She tells her to be quiet or—" She trailed off unconsciously, rubbing the bruise on her arm. Ice flooded my veins. The implication was unmistakable. Rebecca had hurt Kayla for asking about the child in the basement. "Kayla, this is very important. Have you seen this little girl? Actually seen her?" She nodded again. "When Mom thought I was asleep, she took her food. The girl looked really scared, Grandma, like she wanted her mom." My mind reeled with the possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Could Rebecca have kidnapped a child? Was that why she'd been acting so strangely? But why? It made no sense. And yet, looking at Kayla's earnest, frightened face, I knew she wasn't lying. Children her age might exaggerate or misinterpret, but they rarely fabricate complex scenarios out of nothing. "Sweetheart, did this little girl tell you her name?" I asked, trying to gather as much information as possible. Kayla shook her head. "Mom doesn't let me talk to her. She says she's sick and needs to be alone until she gets better." A new thought struck me with terrible clarity. If Rebecca was willing to declare me incompetent and harm Kayla to keep her quiet, what might she do if she suspected Kayla had told me about the child in the basement? I couldn't send my granddaughter back into that house, not until I understood what was happening and could ensure her safety. But I also couldn't simply keep her. That would be kidnapping, and Rebecca would have the law on her side, especially with that incapacity document already in progress. I needed allies, information, evidence, and I needed to move quickly. "Kayla, how would you feel about going to school today?" I asked, formulating a plan. She looked uncertain. "Will Mom be mad?" "No, baby. I'll explain that I thought it would be good for you to keep your routine. We have plenty of time to get you there before the bell." In truth, I needed to speak with Kayla's teacher. Ms. Harris had been teaching kindergarten for 15 years and had a reputation for being observant and protective of her students. If anyone had noticed changes in Kayla's behavior, it would be her. Kayla agreed, seeming almost relieved to have the familiar structure of school ahead of her. I helped her dress, noting how she carefully selected a long-sleeved shirt. Despite the warm May weather covering the bruise, I realized with a pang. As we walked the 3 blocks to Oakwood Elementary, Kayla's small hand in mine, I tried to process what she'd told me. A child locked in Rebecca's basement. It seemed unbelievable, the kind of thing that happened in crime shows, not in real life, not in my family. But the bruise on Kayla's arm was real. Her fear was real. And the document declaring me incompetent was very, very real. Oakwood Elementary hadn't changed much since I'd retired as principal 5 years ago. The same brick facade, the same cheerful murals painted by generations of students, the same worn wooden sign welcoming visitors. It had been my second home for over 3 decades. Several teachers waved as we entered, calling out warm greetings. "Principal Johnson, good to see you back." I smiled and waved back, but my mind was elsewhere. We reached Ms. Harris's classroom just as children were beginning to arrive. Danielle Harris was a tall, elegant woman in her 40s with locks that fell past her shoulders and a smile that put even the shyest children at ease. She'd been one of my best hires before I retired. "Mrs. Johnson and Miss Kayla, what a lovely surprise." She beamed at us both, then noticed my serious expression. "Is everything all right? Kayla, why don't you go put your backpack in your cubby and say hello to your friends?" I suggested. "I need to talk to Ms. Harris for a minute." Once Kayla was out of earshot, engrossed in the morning activity with the other children, I lowered my voice. "Danielle, I need to speak with you privately. It's important." She nodded immediately, serious. "The children have music in 20 minutes. We can talk then." Those 20 minutes felt like the longest of my life. I waited in the teacher's lounge, declining offers of coffee from former colleagues, my mind spinning with what I would say. How did one bring up the possibility that their daughter-in-law was keeping a kidnapped child in her basement? When Ms. Harris finally joined me, closing the door behind her, I took a deep breath and started at the beginning. The document I'd found, Rebecca's strange behavior, the bruise on Kayla's arm, and finally, the bombshell about the child in the basement, Ms. Harris listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, she sat back, exhaling slowly. "Martha, I wish I could say I'm completely shocked, but the truth is, I've been concerned about Kayla for weeks now." My heart sank. "What have you noticed?" "Changes in her behavior. She used to be our classroom sunshine, always volunteering, raising her hand, helping other students. Lately, she's withdrawn, jumpy. She flinches at loud noises." Ms. Harris leaned forward, lowering her voice further. "And then there are the drawings." "Drawings?" She nodded, standing to retrieve a folder from her desk. "We do daily journal time where the children can draw or write about whatever they want. These are Kayla's from the past 2 weeks." She spread several papers on the table between us. My breath caught in my throat. The images were disturbing, especially coming from a 5-year-old. Dark shapes that looked like bars or a cage. A small figure huddled in corners. And most alarming of all, a drawing of what appeared to be a basement with a stick figure child inside, and the word, "Help," written in red crayon above it. "She wouldn't talk about them when I asked," Ms. Harris said quietly. "Just said they were bad dreams." I traced the red letters with a trembling finger. "You believe her, then, about the child?" "I believe something is very wrong in that house." Her voice was firm. "Whether it's exactly as Kayla describes or something her 5-year-old mind is interpreting in the only way it can, I don't know. But these aren't the drawings of a happy, secure child." She gathered the papers, handing them to me. "Take these. You might need them if you go to the authorities." The authorities? Of course. This was a matter for the police now. "Thank you, Danielle. I'll keep you updated." "Please do. And Martha," her eyes were serious, "be careful. If Rebecca is capable of what Kayla is suggesting, she's dangerous." I left the school with the drawings tucked safely in my purse, my mind made up. I would go to the police today, but first I needed more information. The walk home took me past Washington Park, where I spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench feeding the pigeons. Elijah Washington had been my neighbor for nearly 40 years, a retired postal worker with sharp eyes and sharper ears. At 78, he still took daily walks through the neighborhood and missed very little of what happened on our street. "Martha Johnson," he called, waving me over. "Haven't seen you in a few days. Everything all right? You look troubled." I considered brushing him off with pleasantries, but decided honesty might serve me better. Elijah knew everyone and everything in this neighborhood. "Actually, Elijah, I am troubled." I sat beside him on the bench. "Have you noticed anything unusual at Rebecca's house lately?" His bushy white eyebrows rose. "Funny you should ask. Matter of fact, I have." My heart quickened. "What kind of unusual—" He glanced around, ensuring we weren't overheard. "Last Thursday, couldn't sleep with my arthritis acting up. Was sitting on my back porch around midnight hoping the night air might help. Saw Rebecca pull into her driveway, which wasn't odd in itself. Nurses keep strange hours." He paused, tossing another handful of birdseed to the waiting pigeons. What was odd was that she wasn't alone. Had a little girl with her. Not Kayla, this child was smaller. Hair was different too. Rebecca was hurrying her inside, practically dragging her. Child seemed scared, moving all awkward-like. My breath caught. "Are you certain it wasn't Kayla?" "Been watching that child grow up since she was born. Know the difference between her and some other kid." He fixed me with a steady gaze. "There's more." After they went inside, I heard crying. Not normal crying, like a child who's tired or wants something. This was different, frightened. Then it stopped suddenly, like someone had covered the child's mouth. Goosebumps rose on my arms despite the warm spring air. "Elijah, this is important. Would you be willing to tell this to the police if necessary?" He looked surprised but nodded without hesitation. "Course I would. Something wrong with that child." "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." I hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing you could help me with if you're willing." "Name it." "Your nephew Jerome runs the corner store with the security cameras, doesn't he? The ones that face Rebecca's street." A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "You always were sharp as a tack, Martha. Yes, he does. And those cameras keep footage for 2 weeks. He stood brushing birdseed from his pants. "Let me make a call. Meet me back here in an hour." I left Elijah to his pigeons and continued home, my mind processing this new information. If Mr. Washington had seen Rebecca bringing another child into the house, it corroborated Kayla's story. This wasn't just the imagination of a frightened 5-year-old. There really might be a child locked in Rebecca's basement. The thought made me physically ill. What kind of person would do such a thing, and why Rebecca was a nurse, someone who had dedicated her career to helping others? It made no sense. Unless a terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Rebecca's strange behavior had started after Marcus's death 3 years ago. She'd withdrawn from friends, changed jobs twice, and begun attending some kind of support group that she was secretive about. I'd attributed it all to grief. But what if it was something more sinister, and now she was trying to have me declared incompetent? Was it really about my house and savings as I'd initially suspected? Or was it because she feared I might discover her secret? By the time I returned to meet Elijah, my determination had hardened into steel. Whatever was happening, I would get to the bottom of it, for Kayla's sake, for the sake of the mysterious child who might be suffering in Rebecca's basement, and for Marcus, who would never have wanted his wife to become whatever she had become. Elijah was waiting, a small USB drive in his hand. Jerome came through, said to tell you he's got the original saved if you need it for court or whatnot. Thank you, Elijah. This means more than you know. Martha. His voice stopped me as I turned to leave. Be careful. Something ain't right with that situation. I nodded, the weight of the USB drive heavy in my pocket. I know. That's why I have to fix it. My next stop was the police station. The squat brick building had always been a reassuring presence in our community. Today, it looked imposing, almost forbidding. Inside, I asked to speak with someone about a possible missing child. After a brief wait, I was shown to a small interview room where Lieutenant Darnell Robinson joined me. He was around 40 with kind eyes that contrasted with his no-nonsense demeanor. Mrs. Johnson, I understand you have concerns about a child. He sat across from me, notebook ready. I took a deep breath and told him everything. Kayla's revelation, the bruise on her arm, Mr. Washington's sighting of Rebecca with an unknown child, Ms. Harris's observations and the disturbing drawings. I even mentioned finding the incapacity document, though it seemed almost trivial now compared to the possibility of a kidnapped child. Lieutenant Robinson listened attentively, asking occasional clarifying questions. When I finished, he leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Johnson, I appreciate you coming forward with this information, but I have to be honest with you. What we have here is the word of a 5-year-old, some drawings that could be interpreted many ways, and a neighbor who saw your daughter-in-law with a child that wasn't her daughter. And the bruise, I added. Kayla has a bruise that she's clearly afraid to explain. Which is concerning, he acknowledged, but not conclusive evidence of kidnapping. My heart sank. He didn't believe me. Or at least he didn't believe there was enough to act on. What about the security footage? I have it right here. I placed the USB drive on the table between us. We'll certainly review it, he assured me. But even if it confirms what Mr. Washington saw, it doesn't prove wrongdoing. There are many innocent explanations for why your daughter-in-law might have another child with her. At midnight, a frightened child who was practically being dragged. My voice rose with frustration. And what about Kayla's statement? She specifically said there's a girl locked in the basement who cries and says her hands hurt. Lieutenant Robinson's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Johnson, we take all reports about children's welfare very seriously, but we also have to consider all possibilities. Children Kayla's age have vivid imaginations. They can misinterpret things they see or hear. You think she's making this up? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Not necessarily, but I've seen cases where children create explanations for things they don't understand. Maybe she heard crying from a TV show. Maybe Rebecca was babysitting for a friend and Kayla misunderstood the situation. And the petition to have me declared incompetent, is that also a misunderstanding? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. He sighed. Family disputes over elder care are unfortunately common. Without more concrete evidence, there's not much the police can do at this point. I stared at him, the realization dawning slow and cold. You think I'm just a confused old woman, don't you, making mountains out of molehills because I don't get along with my daughter-in-law? That's not what I said, Mrs. Johnson. But it's what you're thinking. I was a school principal for 35 years, Lieutenant Robinson. I know when someone is dismissing me because of my age. His expression confirmed my suspicion. He didn't say it outright, but the message was clear. We often get reports from elderly individuals that turn out to be misunderstandings or exaggerations. We'll look into it, he promised, but the words rang hollow. Review the footage. Maybe send someone by to check on the welfare of your granddaughter. But without more evidence, I can't promise much beyond that. I gathered my pursed disappointment bitter in my mouth. Thank you for your time, Lieutenant. As I stood to leave, a final desperate thought occurred to me. If you won't help me, will you at least tell me what I need to do to make you take this seriously? What kind of evidence would convince you? He considered this, then nodded slightly. Concrete proof, a photo or video of the child in question, documentation of Rebecca bringing a non-family member into the house against their will, anything beyond secondhand accounts and childhood drawings. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. If the authorities wouldn't help me, I would find the evidence myself. One more thing, Mrs. Johnson, Lieutenant Robinson added as I reached the door. If you're concerned about your granddaughter's welfare, you could file for emergency custody. Family court takes allegations of abuse very seriously. I thanked him and left the seed of a plan beginning to form in my mind. I might not be able to prove there was a kidnapped child in Rebecca's basement, not yet, but I could protect Kayla while I gathered the evidence I needed. As I stepped out of the police station into the bright afternoon sun, my phone rang. Rebecca. Martha, is Kayla with you? The school called saying she never showed up today. The lie came easily. She wasn't feeling well this morning, a little stomach upset. I thought it best to keep her home. A pause. You should have called me. I didn't want to bother you during your shift. Another lie, smooth as silk. She's feeling better now. We're having lunch. I'll come get her after work. No need. She's comfortable here. Why don't I bring her home tomorrow morning, give you a chance to rest after your night shift? Another pause, longer this time. Fine. Put her on the phone. My heart skipped a beat. She's in the bathroom right now. I'll wait. I needed to think fast. Actually, Rebecca, I wanted to talk to you about something. That document I found yesterday. We're not discussing that over the phone. Her voice turned cold. And you had no right going through my papers. I wasn't going through anything. It was sitting right on top of the... Tomorrow, Martha. We'll talk tomorrow when I pick up Kayla. She hung up abruptly. I stared at the phone, a chill running down my spine. Rebecca knew I'd discovered her plan to have me declared incompetent. She knew I'd confronted the police with my suspicions, and tomorrow she would come for Kayla. I had less than 24 hours to find proof of the child in Rebecca's basement, less than 24 hours to ensure my granddaughter's safety, and absolutely no idea how I was going to accomplish either task. I stood outside the police station, the Georgia sun beating down on my shoulders, feeling more alone than I had since Marcus died. The weight of what I'd learned pressed on me like a physical burden. A child locked in a basement, my own granddaughter threatened into silence, and a system that wouldn't believe me because I was just another elderly woman with concerns. My phone buzzed with a text from the school, a reminder about the spring carnival next week. Such a normal, mundane thing. How strange that the world kept spinning while mine was shattering apart. I needed help, not from the dismissive Lieutenant Robinson, but from someone who would believe me, someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked because of your age or the color of your skin. Grace Mitchell had been my friend for over 40 years. We'd started teaching together back when Oakwood Elementary was still segregated in all but name. We'd fought those battles side by side, raised our children together, buried our husbands within months of each other. If anyone would stand with me now, it would be Grace. Her modest brick home was only a 15-minute walk from the police station. The hanging baskets of ferns on her porch swayed gently in the breeze as I approached. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. "I saw you coming up the walk," Grace said, arms already opening for a hug. At 70, she still stood straight as a rod, her silver hair cropped close to her scalp, her dark eyes missing nothing. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Martha. Come inside." I followed her into the cool interior, the familiar scent of lemon polish and sweet tea enveloping me. Grace had always kept her home immaculate, a habit from years of proving to a judgmental world that we were every bit as worthy of respect as anyone else. "Sit," she commanded, already pouring tea from a pitcher in her refrigerator. "And tell me what's wrong. Is it Kayla? Is she sick?" "Not sick," I said, my voice catching, "but in danger, I think." Over sweet tea and the lemon cookies Grace always kept on hand, I told her everything. The document I'd found, Kayla's frightening revelation, Mr. Washington's sighting, the dismissive response from the police. As I spoke, Grace's expression shifted from concern to outrage. "That lieutenant actually suggested you were confused," she asked, her voice sharp with indignation. "Not in those words, but the message was clear enough." Grace set her glass down with a decisive click. Some things never change. Black woman over 60 might as well be invisible unless we're serving food or minding babies. "What am I going to do? Grace Rebecca will come for Kayla tomorrow. If there really is a child in that basement—" "First things first," Grace said, practical as always. "We need to keep Kayla safe. That means documentation. Have you taken pictures of the bruise?" I shook my head, feeling foolish for not thinking of it. "Do it as soon as you get home, and write down everything Kayla told you word for word while it's fresh in your memory." She leaned forward, eyes intense. "Then we need more evidence about what's happening in that house. You said Rebecca thinks Kayla is at school." "Yes. She doesn't know I picked her up." "Good. That gives us time." Grace stood moving to a small desk in the corner of her living room. She returned with a notepad and began writing. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm coming home with you. We'll document Kayla's bruise and statement. Then we're going to stake out Rebecca's house." "Stake it out," I repeated, incredulous. "You heard me. If she's got a child in that basement, there must be evidence. Movement at the windows. Maybe she goes down there at regular times for feeding or whatever else." She scribbled more notes. "Elijah's nephew with the security cameras, could he set up something temporary focused on Rebecca's house? I don't know, maybe. Let's find out." She was already reaching for her phone. "And we'll need more allies. Pastor Mitchell from my church, he works with the Children's Advocacy Center downtown. He'll know what legal options we have for protecting Kayla." For the first time since Kayla's revelation, I felt a spark of hope. Grace had always been this way, turning outrage into action, fear into planning. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Grace squeezed my hand. "Don't thank me yet. We've got work to do." 2 hours later, we had assembled what Grace jokingly called our War Council in my living room. Elijah Washington sat in my armchair, his weathered hands resting on his cane. Pastor Mitchell, a tall man with salt and pepper dreadlocks, occupied the sofa beside Grace. And Jerome Washington, Elijah's nephew, who ran the corner store, stood by the window, periodically checking the street. Kayla was napping in her room, exhausted from the emotional morning. Before she'd fallen asleep, we gently asked her more questions about the girl in the basement, carefully documenting her answers and photographing the bruise on her arm. Each detail she shared made my blood run colder. "She cries at night, Grandma, but Mom puts the music on real loud so nobody can hear. Mom takes food down sometimes, sandwiches and water, but not very much. The girl tried to run away once. Mom got really mad. That's when she started locking the door from the outside." Now, with Kayla sleeping, we compared notes and formulated a plan. "I've reviewed the security footage." Jerome said, his voice low and steady. "It confirms what Uncle Elijah saw. A woman matching Rebecca's description bringing a small child into the house at 11:47 p.m. last Thursday. The child appears reluctant, possibly frightened." "Could you make out any identifying features of the child?" Pastor Mitchell asked. Jerome shook his head. "The angle isn't great and it's nighttime, but it was definitely not Kayla, different height, different hair." "I've checked recent missing children reports," Pastor Mitchell added, consulting his tablet. "There's one that might match. Zoe Williams, age 5. African American, went missing from the neighboring county 2 weeks ago." He turned the screen to show us a school photo of a beautiful little girl with beaded braids and a shy smile. The timing would be consistent with what Mr. Washington observed. My heart clenched, looking at Zoe's innocent face. Could this be the child in Rebecca's basement? If so, why would Rebecca have taken her? It made no sense. "What about Rebecca's schedule?" Grace asked. "Martha, you said she claimed to work night shifts, but you suspect she's lying." "Yes. I called the hospital this morning pretending to need to speak with her about a family emergency. They said she wasn't scheduled for any night shifts this week." "So, where does she go?" Jerome wondered aloud. "That's what we need to find out," Grace said firmly. "Jerome, can you set up temporary surveillance on Rebecca's house just for a few days?" "Already done," he replied with a slight smile. Installed 2 cameras this morning after Uncle Elijah called. They're small, wireless, motion-activated. One facing the front door, one with a view of the basement windows. I stared at him in surprise and gratitude. Thank you. I don't know what to say. He shrugged, embarrassed by my thanks. It's what neighbors do. Look out for each other. The footage feeds directly to my phone. Jerome continued showing us the app. If there's movement, we'll know immediately. That's the surveillance covered, Grace said. Now we need to address Kayla's safety. Pastor Mitchell. The pastor leaned forward, his expression serious. Based on what you've told me, we have grounds for an emergency custody petition. The bruise, the documented statement, the clear fear Kayla exhibits a family court judge might grant temporary custody to you, Martha, pending investigation. But that would alert Rebecca immediately, I worried. If she knows we're on to her. What about the child in the basement? Elijah asked, voicing the concern foremost in all our minds. A heavy silence fell over the room. If we moved too quickly to protect Kayla, we might put the other child in greater danger. But if we waited too long... We need to catch Rebecca in the act, Grace finally said. Get irrefutable evidence that there's a child being held against her will, something even Lieutenant Dismissive can't ignore. How? I asked. Jerome's phone buzzed, startling us all. He checked it quickly, his expression sharpening. Movement at Rebecca's house, front door. We clustered around his phone, watching as Rebecca emerged onto her front porch. She looked around furtively, then locked her door not just with the standard lock, but with what appeared to be a padlock on the outside. Who puts a padlock on the outside of their front door? Grace murmured. Someone who doesn't want something inside to get out, Elijah replied grimly. We watched as Rebecca got into her car and drove away. According to the timestamp, it was 2:17 p.m. She's supposed to be at work, I said slowly, but she just left the house. And locked it up like Fort Knox, Grace added. Let me check something, Jerome said, tapping on his phone to switch camera views. The second camera showed the side of the house where narrow basement windows were visible just above ground level. There. See that movement? I squinted at the small screen. Sure enough, there was a slight shifting of a curtain at one of the basement windows. Someone was down there. That could be anyone, Pastor Mitchell cautioned. A housekeeper, a relative staying over. In a basement with the house locked from the outside, Grace countered. Not likely. We need to see inside that basement, I said, conviction growing in my voice. Not just shadows behind curtains. We need to see who's in there. Breaking and entering is a felony, Pastor Mitchell reminded us gently. As much as I share your concern, we need to work within the law or risk making the situation worse. What if we had probable cause, Jerome suggested. Say we heard cries for help coming from inside. Elijah shook his head. That's still breaking and entering, nephew, and who's to say a court would believe we actually heard anything? We fell silent again, the weight of the moral dilemma pressing on us all. A child might be suffering just blocks away, yet our hands were tied by laws designed to protect privacy laws that in this case might be enabling abuse. What if, Grace said slowly, we get Rebecca to incriminate herself, set up a situation where she reveals what she's doing. Like what, I asked. A confrontation, something that pushes her buttons. People reveal things when they're angry or scared. I thought about the slap about Rebecca's flash of rage when I discovered the document. It's risky. Rebecca has a temper, but she's also calculating. She's managed to hide whatever she's doing for some time now. Maybe we should follow her, Jerome suggested. See where she goes when she's supposedly at work. I like that idea. Elijah nodded. Might lead us to understand what she's involved in. I can do it, Jerome offered. My assistant manager can cover the store. While the others continued planning, I found my thoughts wandering to Marcus. What would he make of all this? The woman he married was now unrecognizable to me. Had he ever seen glimpses of this other Rebecca? Had there been warning signs I'd missed? So caught up in my grief over losing him that I failed to see what was happening to his wife. My reverie was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. "Grandma, who are all these people?" We turned to see Kayla standing there in her rumpled clothes from her nap, Mr. Snuggles clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide as she took in the room full of adults, clearly engaged in serious discussion. "These are my friends, Sweet Pea," I said, going to her and kneeling down despite my protesting joints. They're here to help us. Help with what? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. I exchanged glances with the others, silently debating how much to tell her. I'd never believed in lying to children. They deserved the truth delivered appropriately for their age and understanding. To help make sure you stay safe, I told her, and to help the little girl you told me about. Her eyes widened further. You believe me about the girl in our basement? Of course I believe you, sweetheart. Mommy said nobody would believe me, that they'd think I was making up stories. A cold anger settled in my chest at Rebecca's manipulation. Well, Mommy was wrong about that. We all believe you, and we're going to help. Kayla's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to go home, Grandma. I'm scared. I pulled her into a gentle hug, careful of her bruised arm. I know, baby. And if I have anything to say about it, you won't have to go back until it's safe. Over Kayla's head, I met Grace's eyes. Her expression hardened with resolve matching my own determination. Whatever it took, Kayla would not be returning to that house tomorrow, or ever if Rebecca truly was involved in something as heinous as child abduction. As if sensing my thoughts, Pastor Mitchell spoke up. Kayla, would you like some cookies? I think I saw some in the kitchen. Once Kayla had been settled at the kitchen table with cookies and milk out of earshot, he turned to me. I've texted a colleague at Family Services. Given the circumstances, they're willing to do an emergency home visit today. If they substantiate the bruising and document Kayla's statements about being afraid to go home, we can request an emergency hearing for temporary custody. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Pastor. It's just the first step, he cautioned, and it only protects Kayla. We still need to address the other child. One thing at a time, Grace said firmly. First Kayla, then the evidence, then rescue. The social worker arrived within the hour, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Jackson, who interviewed Kayla with gentle but direct questions. She photographed the bruise again, had Kayla demonstrate how it happened. Mommy grabbed me really hard when I asked about the girl and took detailed notes of everything. When she finished, she asked to speak with me privately on the porch. Mrs. Johnson, based on what I've observed, I'm recommending an emergency placement with you pending investigation. Kayla shows clear signs of emotional distress, and the physical evidence corroborates her account of how the injury occurred. I exhaled slowly. Tension I hadn't realized I was holding beginning to uncoil. Thank you. I should warn you, though, this is temporary. The courts generally favor reunification with parents unless there's overwhelming evidence of abuse or neglect. Ms. Lewis will be notified of the placement and given an opportunity to respond. I understand. And one more thing. Ms. Jackson's expression softened slightly. Kayla mentioned something about another child in her mother's basement. We take allegations like that extremely seriously. I've already notified the police that they need to do a welfare check immediately. My heart skipped a beat. Today, they'll go today. She nodded. Protocol mandates same-day response for any report involving potential danger to a child. I thought of Lieutenant Robinson's dismissive attitude and felt a surge of vindication. Let him try to brush this off now with a formal report from Family Services backing up my claims. Thank you, I said again, meaning it from the depths of my soul. After Ms. Jackson left, I returned to the living room where the others were waiting expectantly. Kayla stays with me for now, I announced, unable to keep the relief from my voice. And the police have been officially notified about the child in the basement. They have to check it out today. Grace's face broke into a wide smile. Thank God, now we're getting somewhere. Don't celebrate yet, Pastor Mitchell cautioned. Rebecca will be notified about Kayla's placement, and if she's truly involved in something illegal, she might take steps to hide evidence. Like moving the child, Jerome said gravely. A new fear gripped me. What if Rebecca removed the girl from the basement before police could investigate? What if we'd inadvertently made the situation worse by involving authorities too soon? Jerome's phone buzzed again. He checked it, his expression darkening. Rebecca's back, and she's not alone. We gathered around the phone once more. The footage showed Rebecca returning to her house accompanied by a tall, broad-shouldered man I recognized with a jolt, her brother James Lewis. James had never liked me much, always implying that I was too involved in Marcus and Rebecca's marriage. After Marcus died, he'd stopped coming around altogether, though I knew he and Rebecca remained close. "Who's that?" Grace asked. "Rebecca's brother James. Ex-military works construction now, I think." We watched as they entered the house, Rebecca unlocking the multiple locks with practiced efficiency. The door closed behind them, and for several minutes nothing happened. Then movement at the basement window, again more pronounced this time. The curtain was pulled back briefly, revealing what looked like a small hand pressed against the glass before being quickly withdrawn. "That's a child's hand," Grace whispered, voicing what we all saw. Jerome switched back to the front camera just in time to see Rebecca and James emerging again. James was carrying something, a large duffel bag that he placed carefully in the trunk of his car. "What's in the bag?" Elijah wondered aloud. A horrible thought struck me. "The child. They're moving the child." "It's not big enough," Grace said, though she sounded uncertain. "Is it for a 5-year-old if they—" I couldn't finish the sentence, the implications too terrible to voice. "We need to call the police, now," Pastor Mitchell said firmly, already reaching for his phone. Before he could dial, Jerome's phone buzzed with another alert. Rebecca was exiting the house again, this time carrying what looked like a small suitcase. She placed it in her own car, then went back inside. "She's packing up," Grace said, "getting ready to run." I thought of Kayla safely eating cookies in my kitchen, oblivious to the drama unfolding blocks away. If Rebecca fled with the child from the basement, would we ever find either of them again? "I'm calling," Pastor Mitchell said, dialing 911. While he reported what we were witnessing, I paced the living room, my mind racing. What had happened to Rebecca? How had she gone from the sweet, caring nurse who'd married my son to someone capable of keeping a child prisoner in her basement? The doorbell rang, startling us all. Grace peered through the peephole, then stepped back, her expression grim. "It's Rebecca." My blood ran cold. "What? She can't know Kayla is here. The social worker just left." "Maybe she followed the social worker," Elijah suggested. "Or maybe someone at the school told her you picked Kayla up." The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Then Rebecca's voice, artificially sweet. "Martha, are you home? I came to check on Kayla. The school said she was sick." I froze, unsure what to do. If I didn't answer, would she break in? If I confronted her, what would she do behind me? Jerome was still monitoring his phone, watching James as he returned to Rebecca's house for what appeared to be another bag. "Martha, I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway." Rebecca's voice hardened, the false sweetness evaporating. "Open the door. I want to see my daughter." Pastor Mitchell covered the phone with his hand. "Police are on their way to Rebecca's house, 5 minutes out." To me, he whispered, "Stall her." Taking a deep breath, I moved to the door but didn't open it. "Rebecca, this isn't a good time. Kayla is resting. Open the door, Martha." All pretense was gone now. "I'm taking Kayla home." "She's not feeling well enough to move." I tried to keep my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Why don't you come back tomorrow as we planned?" "Open this goddamn door or I swear I'll break it down." The venom in her voice made me step back involuntarily. Behind me, Grace was ushering Kayla deeper into the house, into my bedroom, where she could be hidden from view. Jerome and Elijah positioned themselves on either side of the door, ready to intervene if Rebecca tried to force her way in. I took another deep breath, then opened the door a crack, the chain still in place. Rebecca stood on my porch, her face contorted with rage. This was not the woman who had married my son. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. "Where is she?" Rebecca demanded. "Where's Kayla?" "She's resting," I repeated. "Rebecca, what's going on? Why are you so upset?" Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Don't play dumb with me, you interfering old bitch. I know what you're trying to do, turning my own daughter against me. Spreading lies." "I haven't spread any lies, Rebecca." "No. Then why was the social worker asking questions at Kayla's school today? Why did the police just show up at my house?" So that explained her panic. Someone the school, Ms. Jackson, Lieutenant Robinson, had tipped her off. "If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. She laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You have no idea what you're messing with, Martha. No idea at all." She leaned closer to the crack in the door, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. This is bigger than you can imagine. I tried to keep you out of it. That's why I filed for guardianship to protect you. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Protect me from what Rebecca—" For a moment, something like genuine fear flashed across her face. Then her expression hardened again. "It doesn't matter now. Just give me my daughter and I'll leave. This is your last chance to stay out of it." "I can't do that." "You don't have a choice." She stepped back, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer. And the police. Reporting you for kidnapping." "Ms. Lewis." Pastor Mitchell stepped into view behind me, his voice calm but authoritative. "I'm Pastor Mitchell from New Hope AME. I'd advise against making false reports to the police. They're already on their way to your house with a warrant based on reports of a child being kept there against her will." Rebecca's face drained of color. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I think we do," I said, finding courage in the support of my friends. "Kayla told us about the girl in your basement, the girl who cries at night, the girl whose hands hurt." "Kayla has an active imagination," Rebecca snarled, but her eyes darted nervously to her car, then back to us. "She's been watching too many crime shows." "Mr. Washington saw you bringing a child into your house late at night," I continued. "A child who wasn't Kayla. The security cameras at the corner store caught it too." Rebecca's composure cracked further. She took a step back, her hand going to her mouth. "You don't understand. You couldn't possibly understand." "Try me," I challenged, pushing the door open a bit wider though still secured by the chain. "Help me understand how you went from being Marcus's loving wife to someone who would hurt a child." At the mention of Marcus's name, something shifted in Rebecca's expression, a flash of raw grief quickly buried under rage. "Don't you dare bring him into this. You have no right. He was my son. And my husband—" She shouted, her control slipping entirely. "My husband who was taken from me. Do you have any idea what that's like? To have the love of your life ripped away for no reason, to be left with nothing but a hole where your heart used to be." Despite everything, I felt a pang of empathy. Of course I knew what that was like. I'd lost my husband after 37 years of marriage. I'd lost my only child. But grief didn't justify whatever Rebecca had done. "I know exactly what that's like," I said quietly. "But it doesn't explain what's happening here, Rebecca. It doesn't explain the child in your basement." She stared at me, her breathing rapid and shallow. For a moment, I thought she might confess everything. Then her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at it, and what little color remained drained from her face. "This isn't over," she hissed, backing away toward her car. "You have no idea what forces you're messing with. None at all." She turned and ran to her car, fumbling with her keys in her haste. As she peeled away from the curb, Jerome's phone buzzed yet again. "Police just arrived at Rebecca's house," he reported, showing us the live feed. 2 patrol cars had pulled up and officers were approaching the front door. James Lewis stood on the porch, his posture defensive. We watched in tense silence as the officers spoke with James, showed him what appeared to be a warrant, and then entered the house despite his obvious objections. Minutes stretched like hours as we waited for any sign of what they found inside. Finally, Pastor Mitchell's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then put it on speaker. "Mrs. Johnson." Lieutenant Robinson's voice filled the room. "You were right. There was a child in the basement, a little girl matching the description of Zoe Williams, the missing child from Clayton County." A collective exhale of relief swept through the room. They'd found her. She was alive. "Is she okay?" I asked, my voice breaking. "She's alive and conscious. Dehydrated, malnourished, and there appears to be some injury to her hands, but she's alive. Emergency services are transporting her to Children's Health Care now." And James Lewis, in custody. He's not talking, but we found some concerning documents in the house. Religious materials references to something called the Temple of Eternal Light. Does that mean anything to you? I shook my head before remembering he couldn't see me. "No, nothing." "We're still processing the scene, but I wanted you to know you were right." There was a pause, then he added, "I apologize for not taking your concerns more seriously this morning." The validation was hollow compared to the relief of knowing the child Zoe had been found. What about Rebecca? She was just here looking for Kayla. She left when she heard the police were at her house. We have an APB out for her now. She won't get far. Another pause. Is Kayla safe with you? Yes. Family Services has placed her with me temporarily. Good. Stay put. Lock your doors. I'll send an officer over as a precaution, but I don't think Rebecca will return to your house. Not now that she knows we're on to her. After the call ended, we sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing what we'd learned. Zoe Williams had been found alive in Rebecca's basement, just as Kayla had said. James Lewis was in custody, and Rebecca was on the run. The Temple of Eternal Light, Grace repeated thoughtfully. What kind of religious materials do you think they found? Nothing good if it involves keeping children in basements, Elijah muttered. I thought about Rebecca's parting words. You have no idea what forces you're messing with. What had she meant? What forces could justify kidnapping and imprisoning a child? Grace seemed to read my thoughts. Whatever Rebecca's involved in, it's not over yet. Not while she's still out there. And not until we understand why, I added softly. Why take Zoe? Why risk everything? Pastor Mitchell checked his watch. I need to get to the hospital. As a clergy member, I can offer support to Zoe and her family. Perhaps learn more about what happened to her. I'll come with you, I said, standing. I want to see her for myself, to know she's really safe. What about Kayla? Grace asked. She can stay here with me and Jerome, Elijah offered. We'll keep her safe. I hesitated, torn between the need to see Zoe with my own eyes and the desire to stay with Kayla. Before I could decide, a small voice came from the hallway. Grandma, is that girl okay? The one from our basement? We turned to see Kayla standing there. Mr. Snuggles clutched to her chest as always. I went to her, kneeling down to her level. Yes, sweet pea. The police found her. She's going to be okay. Is Mommy in trouble? How do you explain to a 5-year-old that her mother is involved in kidnapping and child abuse, that the woman who should have protected her was part of something so disturbing we still couldn't comprehend it? Your mommy has made some bad choices, I said carefully. And yes, she's in trouble. But that's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Kayla nodded solemnly. I know. Mommy said it was for Daddy, to help his soul. But I don't think Daddy would want anyone to be locked up and scared. I stared at her, momentarily stunned by this new piece of information. What do you mean for Daddy? Mommy said the man at the special church told her Daddy's soul was trapped, that he couldn't go to heaven until they did the special ceremony. Kayla's eyes filled with tears. But I don't think Daddy would want that girl to be hurt. He was nice to everyone. I exchanged shocked glances with Grace and Pastor Mitchell. What kind of cult had Rebecca fallen into? What had they convinced her to do in Marcus's name? You're right, sweet pea, I said, gathering Kayla into a gentle hug. Your daddy wouldn't want anyone to be hurt. He was a good man who cared about people. As I held my granddaughter, I realized we'd only begun to scratch the surface of whatever darkness Rebecca had fallen into. The child was safe, yes, but the danger wasn't over. Not while Rebecca remained free, and not while the true nature of the Temple of Eternal Light remained a mystery. The forces we were messing with, as Rebecca had put it, were still very much in play, and somehow horribly they were connected to my son. The knowledge settled over me like a shroud. Whatever happened next, it was clear that the Rebecca I thought I knew had died alongside Marcus 3 years ago. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone dangerous, desperate, and still out there. And despite everything, I couldn't help but wonder, had I somehow failed them both? Children's Health Care of Atlanta was a maze of sterile corridors and hushed conversations. Pastor Mitchell and I walked side by side, our footsteps echoing against the polished floors. The weight of the past 24 hours pressed down on me, making each step an effort. You're doing the right thing, Pastor Mitchell said softly, as if reading my thoughts. Being here for both children. I nodded, unable to find words for the storm of emotions inside me. Relief that Zoe had been found alive. Fear for what she might have endured. Worry for Kayla, left behind with Elijah and Jerome while police searched for Rebecca. And beneath it all, a gnawing question: how had my daughter-in-law become someone capable of such cruelty? At the nurse's station, Pastor Mitchell spoke quietly with a charge nurse who glanced my way with sympathetic eyes. She made a call, and minutes later, a tired-looking woman in a rumpled pantsuit approached us. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Detective Harlow, Clayton County Special Victims Unit." She extended her hand, her grip firm but gentle. Lieutenant Robinson called ahead. "Thank you for coming." "How is she?" I asked immediately. "Zoe." Physically, she's stable. Dehydrated, malnourished. The doctors are treating some injuries to her hands, rope burns mainly. Psychologically, she trailed off, shaking her head slightly. "It's too soon to tell. She's barely spoken since we found her. Her parents, in with her now. They haven't left her side." Detective Harlow studied me intently. "Lieutenant Robinson mentioned your granddaughter was the one who alerted you to Zoe's presence." "Yes. Kayla told me there was a girl locked in their basement. That's why Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, heard her, to keep her quiet." The detective nodded, making a note in a small pad. "We'd like to interview Kayla formally when she's ready. Her testimony will be crucial." "She's only 5, I said protectively. "We have specialists trained to work with children her age. It would be gentle, age-appropriate." Pastor Mitchell placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "I've worked with their team before, Martha. They're excellent with children." I nodded reluctantly. Kayla would have to relive these horrors eventually to ensure Rebecca faced consequences. But not today. Not while the fear was still so fresh. "The Williams family has asked to meet you," Detective Harlow continued. "If you're comfortable with that." I blinked in surprise. "They want to meet me." "You played a significant role in finding their daughter. I think they want to thank you personally." I hadn't expected this. In my mind, I'd done what any decent person would do, believed a child, and acted on that belief. It hadn't felt heroic, just necessary. "Of course," I said. "I'd like to meet them too." Detective Harlow led us down another corridor to a private room with a police officer stationed outside. She knocked softly, then opened the door. The scene inside nearly broke my heart. Zoe Williams lay in a hospital bed that seemed too large for her small frame. IV tubes snaked from her arm and white bandages wrapped her tiny wrists. Her parents, a slender woman, and a broad-shouldered man, both looking exhausted but alert, sat on either side of her bed, each holding one of her hands carefully to avoid the bandages. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams," Detective Harlow said softly. "This is Martha Johnson. Her granddaughter was the one who told her about Zoe." Mrs. Williams stood immediately, moving toward me with tears in her eyes. Before I could speak, she embraced me in a fierce hug that caught me off guard. "Thank you," she whispered against my shoulder. "Thank you for believing your granddaughter, for finding our baby." I returned her embrace, my own eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry for what your family has been through. So sorry my daughter-in-law was involved." Mrs. Williams pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You have nothing to apologize for. You saved Zoe's life." Mr. Williams had risen as well, his expression a complex mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. "The doctors say if she'd been there much longer—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I glanced at Zoe, who was watching our interaction with wary eyes. Despite everything she'd been through, I could see the same spark that shone in Kayla, that innate childhood resilience that somehow survives even the darkest experiences. "Hello, Zoe," I said gently, moving closer to the bed. "My name is Martha. My granddaughter Kayla was worried about you." A flicker of recognition crossed her face at Kayla's name. "The girl with the teddy bear." Her voice was raspy, as if from disuse or too much crying. "Yes, that's Kayla. She loves that bear. His name is Mr. Snuggles." The faintest smile touched Zoe's lips. "She showed him to me once, through the little window." So they had communicated. That explained how Kayla knew so many details about Zoe's condition. "Zoe, honey," Detective Harlow said, approaching the bed, "Mrs. Johnson might be able to help us understand what happened. Is it okay if we talk to her about it? You don't have to say anything if you don't want to." Zoe looked at her parents, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," she whispered. Detective Harlow guided Pastor Mitchell and me to chairs near the door, giving the family some space while keeping us within earshot. "Zoe has told us a little about her time in that basement," she said quietly, "but there are still many gaps. She was taken from a playground near her home 2 weeks ago by a woman matching Rebecca Lewis's description. The woman told her she was special, that she had light inside her that could help someone. She promised to take her to get ice cream. My stomach turned at the calculated manipulation. A child lured with kindness, only to be imprisoned and terrified. Was she alone with Zoe the whole time? I asked. No. She's mentioned a man named Solomon who came to see her several times. We believe this is Solomon Wright, the leader of what appears to be a cult operating in the area, the Temple of Eternal Light. Pastor Mitchell frowned. I've heard whispers about this group. They claim to be a spiritual healing center, but there have been concerns about their practices. Isolation of members, demands for significant financial contributions, unusual rituals. What kind of rituals? I asked, dreading the answer. That's what we're still trying to determine, Detective Harlow said. The documents we found in Rebecca's house mentioned a harvesting ceremony scheduled for the next full moon, references to vessels of light and soul transfer. A chill ran through me. Kayla's words echoed in my mind. Mommy said it was for Daddy, to help his soul. My son, I said, my voice barely audible. Marcus died 3 years ago. Rebecca never really recovered. Is it possible this cult convinced her they could bring him back somehow using these children? Detective Harlow's expression was grim. It's a working theory. Grief makes people vulnerable to manipulation, especially when it comes with promises of reuniting with loved ones. James Lewis is still refusing to talk, she continued, but his phone contained communications with Solomon Wright discussing preparations for a major ceremony, and we found a list of 5 children's names, including Zoe and Kayla. My blood ran cold. Kayla was on the list. My granddaughter, Detective Harlow, nodded solemnly. The last name on the list. We believe the ceremony was planned for tomorrow night, the full moon. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca hadn't just been involved in kidnapping Zoe. She had been planning to include her own daughter in whatever horrific ritual they were planning. We need to find her, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. Rebecca, and this Solomon Wright before they harm any other children. We have officers searching for both of them. Wright's compound outside the city is being raided as we speak. Pastor Mitchell leaned forward, his expression troubled. These groups usually have contingency plans, secondary locations. If they knew the ceremony was important enough, they'd have backup sites prepared. Detective Harlow nodded. We're checking properties connected to known members. The problem is most of this group operates under the radar. Many members use aliases or cash transactions to avoid detection. I thought about Rebecca, about how thoroughly she had hidden this side of herself from me, from everyone. How many others like her were out there leading double lives while preparing for something unthinkable? Martha, Pastor Mitchell said gently, you knew Rebecca better than anyone here. Is there anywhere she might go? Somewhere she felt safe or connected to Marcus? I closed my eyes, trying to think past my shock and horror to the practical question. Where would Rebecca go if she were running desperate, devoted to this twisted cause? There's a lake house, I said, slowly memory surfacing. About 2 hours north. Marcus and Rebecca used to go there on weekends. It belonged to his friend from college, but I think Rebecca kept using it after Marcus died. For healing retreats, she called them. Detective Harlow was already reaching for her phone. Do you have an address? No, but I know it's on Lake Lanier. Marcus called it the cabin with the red door. He showed me photos once. She stepped away to make the call, speaking rapidly into her phone. Pastor Mitchell turned to me, his expression serious. Martha, I need to ask you something difficult. If the police find Rebecca at this lake house, would you be willing to speak with her? Sometimes in these situations, a familiar voice can help de-escalate. I stared at him, caught off guard by the request. You want me to talk to her after everything she's done? I know it's asking a lot, but Rebecca trusts you, or at least she did once. And if there are other children involved, the thought of facing Rebecca again, knowing what I now knew, made my stomach knot with anxiety. But if there was any chance it could help save another child like Zoe, how could I refuse? I'll do it, I said quietly. But I don't know if she'll listen to me. You didn't see her eyes when she came to my house. There was nothing of the woman I knew. Cult indoctrination is powerful, he acknowledged. But so are family bonds, and whether she admits it or not, you're still family to her. Detective Harlow returned her expression cautiously optimistic. We've identified a property on Lake Lanier registered to a Thomas Weldon. He was Marcus's college roommate, correct? I nodded, surprised at their efficiency. Yes, they stayed close after graduation. We're dispatching units now. If Rebecca's there, we'll find her. She hesitated, then added, We'd like you to come with us, Mrs. Johnson, just to the staging area. If she's there and the situation allows, having you speak to her might help. Events were moving rapidly now, the momentum carrying me along. I thought of Kayla, safe with Elijah and Jerome, protected by the officer Lieutenant Robinson had sent. I thought of Zoe finally reunited with her parents, but forever changed by her ordeal. And I thought of the other children on that list, unknown to me, but just as precious, just as deserving of protection. I'll come, I said, whatever I can do to help. The staging area turned out to be a state police barracks about 5 miles from the lake house. Detective Harlow, Pastor Mitchell, and I had traveled in a police cruiser, sirens silent but moving with urgent purpose through the late afternoon traffic. By the time we arrived, the operation was already underway. Lieutenant Robinson met us at the door, his expression grim but determined. Mrs. Johnson, thank you for coming. We've confirmed Rebecca Lewis is at the lake house along with 3 adults we believe are members of the Temple of Eternal Light. Solomon Wright. He shook his head. No sign of him yet, but we've identified one of the other adults as Elias Thorne Wright's second-in-command according to our intelligence. Any children? Pastor Mitchell asked the question foremost in all our minds. Thermal imaging shows 6 heat signatures total, 4 adults, 2 smaller figures that could be children. We're proceeding with extreme caution. My heart raced. 2 children. 2 more victims like Zoe caught in this nightmare. Lieutenant Robinson led us to a room where monitors displayed feeds from officers' body cameras and a drone circling the property. The lake house was smaller than I'd imagined from Marcus's descriptions, a rustic cabin with weathered wood siding and, true to its nickname, a bright red door. It sat nestled among pine trees on a secluded lot with a small dock extending into the lake behind it. We have officers positioned around the perimeter, Lieutenant Robinson explained. Our negotiator is preparing to make initial contact. If that fails, we're prepared for a tactical entry, but obviously we want to avoid that with children potentially inside. I studied the monitors, searching for any glimpse of Rebecca. What would I say to her if given the chance? How could I reach past the delusion and manipulation to the woman who had once been part of my family? There's movement at the door, someone called out. On the center monitor, the red door opened slowly. A man stepped out onto the porch, his hands raised above his head. Even from the drone's overhead perspective, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair marked him as out of place in the rustic setting. That's Elias Thorne, an analyst said, consulting a tablet. 47 former investment banker. Joined the temple 5 years ago after a divorce. Rose quickly through the ranks. Another figure appeared in the doorway behind Thorne, a woman slim and pale with her hair pulled back severely from her face. Rebecca. Even from this distance, even through the grainy drone footage, I could see the tension in her posture, the rigid set of her shoulders. They're responding to the negotiator, Lieutenant Robinson explained, gesturing to an officer speaking into a radio near the monitors. Thorne is asking for guarantees of safety if they surrender peacefully. Is he giving up? Pastor Mitchell asked, sounding surprised. It appears so, Lieutenant Robinson said cautiously, but we're proceeding as if it could be a diversion. On the monitor, Thorne was nodding at something the negotiator had said. He turned and spoke to Rebecca, who shook her head vehemently. An argument seemed to ensue with Thorne gesturing emphatically toward the police positions, and Rebecca repeatedly shaking her head. She's not cooperating, I murmured. She still believes in whatever they've told her. Mrs. Johnson, Lieutenant Robinson said, turning to me, would you be willing to speak with Rebecca over the radio? It might help de-escalate the situation. The moment had come sooner than I'd expected. I swallowed hard, nodding. What should I say? Just speak from the heart. Remind her of who she was before all this. Connect her to reality. The negotiator handed me a radio showing me which button to press to speak. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. "Rebecca," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's Martha, Marcus's mother." There was a long pause. On the monitor, Rebecca froze at the sound of my voice coming through the negotiator's speaker. Then she stepped forward, taking the radio the negotiator offered. "Martha," her voice crackled through the speaker in my hand, sounding smaller and younger than I'd expected. "What are you doing here?" "I'm trying to help you, Rebecca. This has gone too far. Whatever the temple promised you about Marcus, about bringing him back or helping his soul, it's not real. It can't be real." "You don't understand," she said, an edge of desperation entering her voice. "I've seen proof. Solomon showed me how the light can be transferred, how souls can return through the right vessels. Marcus is coming back to me, to us." My heart broke at the raw grief in her voice, at how thoroughly this cult had exploited her pain. "Rebecca, Marcus is gone. We both loved him. We both miss him every day. But what you're doing now, kidnapping children, hurting them, Marcus would be horrified." "The children aren't hurt," she insisted. "They're chosen, special. Their light is pure enough to create a pathway." "Zoe was hurt," I countered gently. "She's in the hospital with rope burns on her wrists. She was terrified, Rebecca. And Kayla, your own daughter, you hurt her arm to keep her quiet. What would Marcus say about that?" Silence stretched for several seconds. On the monitor, Rebecca seemed to deflate slightly, her rigid posture softening. "How is Kayla?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible through the static. "She's safe. She's worried about you. She told me you said all this was for her daddy, to help his soul." "It is," Rebecca insisted, but her voice wavered. "Solomon explained it all. The ceremony would bring Marcus back. We'd be a family again. You are a family already, you and Kayla. But this path you're on, it's destroying that family, not healing it." More silence. The analysts and officers around me were perfectly still, not wanting to disrupt the fragile connection. "Did they tell you what happened to the last children they used in these ceremonies?" I asked softly. "They went home afterward. Solomon said, 'Solomon lied to you, Rebecca. Whatever he promised, whatever he showed you that seemed like proof, it was manipulation. People like him prey on grief. They see pain and they exploit it.'" I could see her shaking her head on the monitor, but her conviction seemed to be crumbling. "I saw Marcus," she whispered, "during the meditation sessions. I heard his voice. Grief can make us see and hear what we desperately want to." I said, thinking of my own experiences after losing both my husband and son. "I know that better than most. But Marcus is at peace, Rebecca. He wouldn't want this." On the monitor, Thorne moved toward Rebecca, speaking urgently into her ear. She pushed him away. "The children inside," I pressed, sensing a shift in her. "Are they hurt?" A long pause. "No, they're just scared. Solomon said they had to be kept separate until the ceremony, that their light couldn't mix before then. Let them go, Rebecca. End this now before anyone else gets hurt." "If I do," her voice broke, "I'll never see Marcus again. This was my last chance." The pain in her voice was so raw, so familiar, that tears sprang to my eyes. "I know what it's like to lose someone you love with your whole heart, to feel like the world should stop spinning because they're not in it anymore. But we go on, Rebecca. We carry them with us in how we live, in how we love those still here." I thought of Kayla, of how much of Marcus I saw in her smile, her determination, her gentle heart. Marcus lives on in Kayla, in her laugh that sounds just like his, in her eyes that see the world with the same kindness. Don't take her father's legacy and turn it into something dark. Through the radio came the sound of muffled sobbing. On the screen, Rebecca had sunk to her knees on the cabin porch, the radio clutched to her chest. "I just wanted him back, she cried. "I just wanted things to be like they were before." "I know," I said gently. "We all do. But this isn't the way." After a moment, Rebecca seemed to gather herself. She stood, ignored Thorne's attempt to stop her, and spoke directly into the radio. "The children are in the back bedroom. They're not tied up, just locked in. They're scared, but not hurt. She took a shaky breath. I'll surrender if you promise they'll be safe. They will be, I assured her. And Kayla, she needs her mother. Not the woman who hurt her to keep secrets, but the mother who loved her, who Marcus loved. Will I see her again? The question was barely audible. I couldn't promise that, not with the charges Rebecca would face, but I also couldn't crush the fragile connection we'd established. I don't know what happens next, Rebecca. That's up to the courts. But I promise Kayla will know you tried to make things right in the end. She nodded, though I couldn't see it through my tears. On the monitor, she handed the radio back to the negotiator and walked down the porch steps with her hands raised. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Thorne and the other 2 cult members surrendered as well, though with less cooperation than Rebecca had shown. The 2 children, a 7-year-old boy named DeMarcus and a 6-year-old girl named Emily, both reported missing within the last week, were safely recovered and reunited with their frantic parents at the barracks. I watched from a distance as Rebecca was placed in a police car, her face tear-streaked, but calmer than I'd seen it in years. Our eyes met briefly as the car pulled away. I couldn't read her expression, remorse, resignation, perhaps even relief. But the wild desperation that had frightened me at my house was gone. You did an amazing thing today, Lieutenant Robinson said, joining me as I sat quietly in the barracks break room, a cold cup of coffee forgotten before me. Those children might not be alive if you hadn't connected with Rebecca the way you did. I just spoke the truth, I said wearily. About grief, about Marcus. Things she already knew deep down beneath all the manipulation. Well, that truth saved lives. He sat across from me, his expression serious. There's something else you should know. The raid on Solomon Wright's compound found evidence of previous ceremonies. Photos, videos, documentation. My stomach clenched. Other children. He nodded grimly. We're still piecing it all together, but it appears this has been going on for at least 2 years. Wright convinced his followers that certain children had special light that could be transferred to the dead through ritual. He charged families hundreds of thousands of dollars for these ceremonies. Did any of the children... I couldn't finish the question. Some survived. Some didn't. His voice was flat professional, but I could see the toll this case was taking on him. Wright is still at large, but with the evidence we've gathered and testimony from Rebecca and the others, it's only a matter of time. I thought of those families, desperate like Rebecca, grieving like me, manipulated into believing the impossible. And I thought of the children sacrificed to that desperate hope. What will happen to Rebecca? I asked quietly. That depends on her cooperation, the extent of her involvement, her mental state. He sighed. I won't sugarcoat it, she's facing serious charges, but her assistance today will count in her favor. And Kayla, family services will work with you on a more permanent guardianship arrangement if that's what you want. Given the circumstances, I can't imagine the courts would object. What I wanted was for none of this to have happened, for Marcus to still be alive, for Rebecca to be the woman she once was, for Kayla to have both her parents whole and loving. But wishes couldn't change reality. Only actions could shape what came next. I want Kayla with me, I said firmly, and I want to help the other families affected by this cult. They'll need support from someone who understands. Lieutenant Robinson nodded approvingly. Pastor Mitchell mentioned you might feel that way. He's already talking about setting up a support group. Dawn was breaking as we finally headed back to Atlanta. Pastor Mitchell dozed beside me in the back of the police cruiser, exhausted from the night's ordeal. I stared out at the golden light touching the treetops, feeling strangely hollow, yet somehow lighter. The nightmare wasn't over. There would be investigations, trials, years of healing ahead for all involved. But the immediate danger had passed. The children were safe. And somewhere in the tangle of grief, manipulation, and darkness, a truth had emerged. Love couldn't bring back the dead, but it could save the living. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Kayla just woke up, asking for you. All quiet here. I smiled faintly, picturing my granddaughter with her beloved Mr. Snuggles, safe in my home that would now be hers too. There would be challenges ahead. Explaining to a 5-year-old why her mother wasn't coming home, helping her understand the twisted beliefs that had led Rebecca astray, supporting her through the inevitable questions about good and evil, truth and lies. But we would face those challenges together one day at a time, and somehow I knew Marcus would be proud of that. 6 months later, I stood in the sunshine outside the courthouse holding Kayla's hand as we watched families gather for the first official meeting of the Healing Light Foundation. Pastor Mitchell had helped me establish the nonprofit to support families affected by cult manipulation and exploitation, both those who had lost loved ones to groups like the Temple and those whose loved ones had been seduced into the group's beliefs. Solomon Wright had eventually been captured trying to cross into Canada. His trial was still pending, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Rebecca had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for her full cooperation, receiving a 10-year sentence, with eligibility for parole after 5. Her diagnosis of severe depression and post-traumatic stress following Marcus's death had been considered in sentencing. I took Kayla to visit her monthly watching as mother and daughter rebuilt a fragile relationship brick by painful brick. Rebecca was receiving intensive therapy in prison, slowly untangling the web of manipulation that had led her to participate in such horrors. Some days were better than others, but there was progress, real progress. "Grandma, look!" Kayla tugged at my hand, pointing to where Zoe Williams was climbing out of her parents' car. "Zoe's here." The two girls had formed a special bond through their shared trauma, a friendship that had helped both of them heal in ways adult intervention couldn't touch. They ran to each other now, embracing with the uncomplicated joy of children who had seen darkness but chosen light. Mrs. Williams approached me with a warm smile. She looked years younger than when I'd first met her in that hospital room, the return of her daughter bringing life back to her tired features. "Martha, the place looks wonderful." She gestured to the community center where our foundation would meet. "You've done something amazing here." I shook my head. We all did. Every family who refused to be silenced, every child who was brave enough to speak the truth. My gaze drifted to Kayla and Zoe, now sitting cross-legged on the grass, heads bent together over a book. Despite everything they'd endured, they were still children, resilient, hopeful, looking forward rather than back. "Marcus would be proud, Mrs." Williams said softly, following my gaze. "Of you, of Kayla, of turning such darkness into something that helps others." I smiled, feeling the familiar ache that came with hearing my son's name, but now accompanied by a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. "Yes," I agreed. "I think he would." As families continued to arrive, some I knew from the case, others new to our group, but carrying similar burdens, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything I'd experienced since retiring as principal. This was my new calling, helping others find their way back from the edge of despair, just as I had done. "Ready, Grandma?" Kayla asked, returning to take my hand, Zoe beside her. I looked down at these two extraordinary children, their eyes clear and trusting despite all they'd seen. Then I looked at the gathering of families, each with their own story of loss and survival, each seeking connection and understanding. "Yes, sweet pea," I said, squeezing her small hand in mine. "I'm ready." Together we walked into the light of a new beginning.